The phrase played in my mind like a ticker-tape headline as I drove away from the city, every mile a measure of my escaping anonymity. It wasn't about the revenge, it was about the detonation. I wasn't just exposing Daniel, I was dismantling a machine, Project Chimera, that would have allowed Crota's defense to spy on entire populations with the same cold intimacy he'd used on me. The heavy silence of the car was a stark contrast to the expected roar of the live conference, a roar I was about to turn into a shriek of panic and collapse. I pulled into the parking lot of the suburban university library, my destination of choice for its archaic, untraceable public network. Daniel was relying on the sophisticated digital noise of a major city to hide his activities. He would never think to look in a place so digitally quiet, a network used primarily by students checking overdue book notices. The irony was perfect. The future of predictive security would be destroyed from a public terminal built in 1998. In the back corner of the library, tucked behind stacks of forgotten dissertations, I set up my laptop. The encrypted drive containing the self-destruct payload and the Chimera documentation was connected. My fingers, surprisingly steady, flew over the keys, running a final battery of diagnostic checks. The payload was a masterpiece of digital deception, a piece of code that would read, to any frantic Kronos technician, like a mandatory mission-critical system update. My stomach, however, was a knot of ice. This was the point of no return. Up until this moment, the betrayal had been a private surgical operation, a battle fought only on the command line. Now it was about to become public, messy, and irreversible. Daniel would lose everything, and while he deserved the ruin, the weight of being the architect of that disaster settled heavily in my chest. I accessed the live stream. The camera swept across the Kronos auditorium, a sea of suits, military officials, investors, and corporate rivals, all gathered to worship at the altar of Daniel's achievement. He was on stage, impeccably dressed, a confident, practiced smile plastered on his face. He looked like the man I married, a brilliant engineer on the cusp of his greatest professional victory. He had no idea the wire was cut. The clock on my screen ticked down to the start of his keynote address. I visualized the process one last time. Daniel connects his laptop to the Kronos display server. My modified code intercepts the connection command. The payload executes, simultaneously displaying the incriminating documents and triggering the multi-frequency broadcast. It had to be precise, timed to the millisecond. Daniel began to speak, his voice booming with forced enthusiasm as he introduced the predictive security platform. He used marketing rhetoric about preemptive defense and civilian safety, words that felt like acid given what I knew was running beneath the surface of his presentation. I watched his gestures, his confidence, and felt a surge of cold, professional rage. He was selling a monster as a miracle cure. He moved to the climax of his introduction, announcing the live demonstration. "And now," he said, gesturing toward the massive screen behind him, "we initiate the primary data bridge, showing the real-time operational capacity of Chimera's predictive models." He reached for his keyboard, the moment I had been planning for 3 long, deceitful weeks. My fingers hovered over the enter key on the public terminal. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of the conference audio coming from my speakers, the rustle of the audience's anticipation. This was it, the synchronization point. The truth was about to detonate in a room full of the world's most powerful people. Daniel executed the connection command on stage. Click. My finger slammed down on the enter key, executing the broadcast script. The library terminus screen flashed a brief 1-second confirmation. Payload deployed. On the live stream, the projection screen behind Daniel did not switch to the expected Kronos dashboard. Instead, it flashed a stark, unauthorized, and terrifying message in huge red letters. Chimera initiates self-destruct protocol. A microphone feedback shrieked. Daniel froze, his hand still hovering over his laptop, his face instantly draining of color. He looked from his machine to the screen, his brilliant mind momentarily unable to process the impossible digital anomaly occurring at the moment of his triumph. The auditorium erupted. People started shouting, security guards rushed the stage, but the digital cascade was already fully unleashed. The laptop screen rapidly cycled through the damning evidence I had copied, the internal memos, the project briefs, the signed confirmation of the unethical testing. The auditorium erupted. People started shouting, security guards rushed the stage, but the digital cascade was already fully unleashed. The laptop screen rapidly cycled through the damning evidence I had copied, the internal memos, the project briefs, the signed confirmation of the unethical testing. The final image that locked onto the screen, for the whole world to see, was a clear line from a Kronos document. Project Chimera Beta Test Subject, Dr. Evelyn Reed, wife of lead engineer. I watched Daniel get manhandled by his own security team, his frantic, panicked attempts to regain control of his laptop failing as the self-destruct loop continued to flood the stream with proof. I felt a chill of absolute, cold finality. The detonation was successful. The noise on the live stream abruptly cut out, replaced by a static, technical difficulty screen, but it was far too late. The data, the irrefutable evidence, was already airborne, copied and distributed simultaneously across dozens of non-standard channels, thanks to the encrypted cascade I had launched. I leaned back in the old wooden chair, the tension in my shoulders finally releasing, replaced by a strange, hollow calm. My work was done. The system was exposed. Daniel was publicly ruined, and the dangerous technology was compromised before it could be officially deployed. The only sound in my corner of the library was the distant shushing of the pneumatic book return, a gentle sound of order prevailing over chaos. I executed the final critical command, a wipe function designed to erase the temporary local script from the public terminal and my own encrypted laptop's buffer. I needed to ensure that no digital residue linked the launch point back to me. My personal mission was complete, but the professional battle was just beginning. I knew that within minutes, Kronos would have every available resource, every digital investigator, every legal hawk pointed at the scene of the crime. They would be dissecting them. Network logs, hunting for the originating IP, desperate to discredit the source. I closed my laptop with a quiet click and slipped the encrypted drive into my coat pocket. My next move was strategic. I had to preempt Kronos' narrative that I was a disgruntled, emotionally unstable wife who had acted alone out of personal spite. I retrieved my professional phone, the one with the specialized security protocols, and placed the first of 3 pre-planned calls, not to the police, but to my legal counsel, Mr. Alan Thorne, a specialist in corporate ethics and whistleblower protection. Alan answered on the first ring, his voice tight. "Evelyn, what the hell is going on? My phone is blowing up. There's a live feed of your husband being escorted off stage, and the headlines are catastrophic." I kept my voice measured and professional. "Alan, I have full documentation of Project Chimera, its unethical testing parameters, the source code, and proof of my non-consensual use as the test subject. I need you to contact the FTC and the Congressional Oversight Committee immediately. Position me as the primary source and the primary victim. I am prepared to cooperate fully." My second call was to the CEO of Nexus Security Solutions, my former employer. I briefly, clinically, explained that I was the source of the Kronos breach, providing just enough technical detail to confirm my competency and credibility, but reassuring him that my actions were completely personal and did not involve Nexus resources or intellectual property. My goal was to protect my professional standing and ensure Nexus wasn't dragged into the ensuing
corporate war, which would be crucial for establishing my credibility as an objective expert later. My third call was to a contact at a major national newspaper, offering an exclusive, but strictly off-the-record, tip about where the full, decrypted documentation of Chimera was currently streaming. By feeding the media, I ensured the story would not just be contained to the financial and military sectors, but would become a public scandal, making it politically impossible for the agencies to bury the investigation. I was creating a firewall of public knowledge around the evidence. Leaving the library, I felt the first stirring of a strange, profound relief. The immense weight of living the lie, of playing the oblivious wife while meticulously planning the annihilation of Daniel's career, was finally lifted. For weeks, every smile, every domestic interaction, had been a performance run to confuse Chimera's behavioral algorithms. Now, I could simply be Evelyn Reed, the highly capable forensic expert who refused to be a surveillance subject. I drove to the anonymous hotel I had reserved days earlier, paid for with cash under a pseudonym. I shed my professional suit, feeling like I was stripping off the costume of the woman Daniel thought he controlled. As I watched the news reports, the shocked faces of the investors, the furious press conferences being held by Kronos's bewildered executives, I felt a resurgence of professional pride. My code had executed perfectly. My strategy had been flawless. The news analysts were already praising the stunning technical elegance of the data release, even as they condemned the content. They noted that the data flow had been impossible to trace, confirming that I had successfully managed to hide my footprint from the world's most sophisticated contractor. Daniel, meanwhile, was under mandatory questioning by both Kronos security and likely federal agents, his professional life unraveling with every passing minute.
The next morning, the hotel television screamed the headlines. I was no longer an analyst. I was a global story. I knew Kronos would retaliate by attacking my character, painting me as a bitter, unstable woman driven by emotional revenge. This was the anticipated counter-narrative, and I had prepared for it. My clean professional record, my preemptive contact with the law firm, and the irrefutable, signed documents confirming Daniel's actions were my defense. I met Alan Thorne at a neutral location, a nondescript downtown office, where he confirmed the magnitude of the fallout. The FTC had already frozen Kronos's assets related to Chimera. Daniel was being held and interrogated. Evelyn, Alan said, shaking his head in a mixture of awe and horror. They are calling this the most decisive, sophisticated corporate sabotage in history. But your evidence is ironclad. You're not the defendant here. You're the star witness. I handed Alan the encrypted drive containing the full, raw data, the master file of Project Chimera. This is the core, I told him. Its structure, its ethical flaws, its potential for abuse. It proves I acted out of necessity, not malice. My motive had always been about stopping the abuse of power, a principle I had spent my entire career defending. The legal process that followed was slow and brutal, but I remained steadfast. My professional background gave my testimony weight, and my calm, forensic analysis of the events starkly contrasted with Daniel's frantic, defensive denials. He had gambled his life on the idea that my loyalty outweighed my intelligence. He had lost everything to his own arrogance.
3 months later, the divorcee papers were finalized, separating me from the legal and emotional wreckage. Daniel faced fraud charges and professional ruin. Kronos was gutted. My final act was selling the house, the site of the betrayal. I wanted no memory, no ghost, digital or otherwise, lingering in my future. I didn't return to Nexus. Instead, I accepted the appointment as a chief ethics consultant for a major international regulatory body. My new office, minimalist and facing the open sky, had no smart technology. My career had not only survived the detonation, but had been elevated by it. I had claimed my power, not through tragedy, but through my expertise. I had detonated my husband's career, but I had liberated my own life. The new office was a deliberate departure from the opulent, tech-cluttered aesthetic of Kronos and the competitive tension of Nexus. It was minimalist, featuring only a secure workstation and a view of the city skyline, a view I appreciated now, knowing it was mine, not Daniel's, and certainly not under surveillance. My title, Chief Ethics Consultant, was a formal acknowledgement that the very qualities Daniel had dismissed as domestic distractions, my rigorous ethics and meticulous attention to detail, were now my highest professional assets. My first task was leading the review board charged with dismantling the technological architecture of Chimera. It was a strange, almost surreal process, dissecting the brilliant, corrosive work of the man I had once loved. I knew the code better than anyone, even Daniel himself, having lived inside its operational parameters. This unique insight ensured that every backdoor was sealed, every residual data ghost was purged,
and no copy of the dangerous algorithm could resurface on the black market.
I had occasional mandatory contact with the federal prosecutors preparing the case against Daniel. Each conversation was professional and devoid of emotion. I provided technical testimony on the project's structure, the security vulnerabilities he exploited, and the scope of the fraud he committed. I never spoke of the betrayal. The code spoke for itself, detailing his calculated use of my identity and privacy. Daniel, meanwhile, launched a desperate public defense through his legal team, attempting to invoke the disgruntled spouse defense. He claimed I had stolen his intellectual property and was acting out of extreme emotional duress. But the evidence, the time-stamped project documents, his own encrypted digital signature, and the clean forensic audit of my network was an unassailable wall of objective truth. His narrative collapsed under the weight of his own metadata. The tech industry reacted with a mixture of terror and awe. The Evelyn Reed case became required reading for every corporate ethics board and every computer science class. My successful counterstrike served as a stark warning. Sophisticated power deployed unethically could be undone by sophisticated expertise deployed ethically. The fear I had instilled in the industry was not personal. It was institutional. I finally returned to the house one last time before the sale went through. It was professionally emptied, the rooms echoing with the ghosts of a life that never truly existed. I walked through the kitchen, the living room, and the bedroom, the sites of Daniel's hidden microphones and silent data streams. I paused by the space where the photo frame had sat. The finality of the clean, empty space was deeply satisfying. The house was now just real estate, cleansed of its digital toxicity.
The sale of the home and the subsequent financial settlements left me comfortably independent. I had ensured that all assets directly from Project Chimera were seized by the government, denying Daniel any profit from his crime. My financial security was rooted in my legitimate earnings and my new consulting role, completely untainted by his deception. I began to mentor young women in the field of cybersecurity, focusing heavily on ethical standards and digital defense. I taught them that code was not just a tool for creation, but a tool for accountability. My goal was to empower a generation of analysts who possessed both the technical skill to build powerful systems and the moral rigor to refuse to build corrupt ones. One afternoon, I received a package containing a single letter. It was from Daniel, smuggled out by his attorney against professional advice. I recognized his frantic, hurried handwriting. It was a chaotic mix of denial, bitter regret, and a terrifying insistence that I had destroyed a necessary vision and that I had always been the weakness in his code. I didn't read past the first paragraph. I simply placed the letter, unread, into a professional document shredder. It was a fitting end for his final, desperate attempt at communication, reduced to unrecoverable digital confetti. His narrative, his apologies, and his accusations no longer had any power over me. My focus was forward. My current work involved drafting new international guidelines on data residency and the ethical deployment of AI and infrastructure, ensuring future systems could not replicate the insidious, invasive structure of Chimera. I was building the world I wanted to live in, one secure protocol at a time.
I was approached by several media outlets for exclusive interviews, but I politely declined. My story was already told, encoded in the public record of the Kronos collapse. I wanted my legacy to be the work I did now, not the spectacular destruction I had once engineered. I was a professional, not a celebrity. Occasionally, in moments of quiet reflection, I would remember the man I thought I had married, the ambitious, brilliant engineer, before the digital corruption set in. I acknowledged the grief for the life that was supposed to be, but it was a distant, intellectual sadness, not a sharp pain. I had mourned that man long before the detonation. My life was now defined by integrity, purpose, and a profound, hard-won sense of peace. I was no longer looking over my shoulder, no longer listening for the faint, hidden hum of surveillance.
The silence was complete, digital and emotional. I adopted a new ritual. Every evening, I would personally check the security logs on my own personal network, a small, clean system running on open source code. It wasn't born of paranoia, but of responsibility. I knew the cost of complacency. The final realization I carried was this: Daniel's error was not in using Chimera on me, but in thinking that the person who designed the counter system would be driven only by simple, predictable emotion. He failed to account for the intellectual rigor of a woman who was a better, more ethical engineer than he was. My love was gone, but my code was flawless. The new professional silence was the absolute bedrock of Evelyn's world, a tangible relief from the digital noise and toxic performance of her past, allowing her mind to operate with the clean, unimpeded rigor that defined her. She was now deeply immersed in drafting the international AI guidelines, ensuring that the structural flaws and ethical breaches of Project Chimera could never be replicated under any jurisdiction, meticulously outlining protocols for transparency and data custody, a task that demanded relentless focus, yet provided a restorative sense of purpose. She often reflected on Daniel, not with bitterness, but as a crucial professional case study, the ultimate example of a brilliant mind corrupted by unchecked power and the fatal underestimation of his partner's intellect. The true victory, she understood, was not the public detonation of his career, but the private, intellectual triumph of proving that integrity was the superior algorithm, a defense mechanism stronger than any surveillance state. She had successfully navigated the wreckage of her marriage, the chaos of the corporate fallout, and the ensuing media frenzy, emerging as an expert whose authority was forged in the fire of personal crisis and validated by the irrefutable truth of her code. Her life, rebuilt on solid ethical and technical foundations, was now a testament to autonomy, a quiet, unmonitored existence where her own conscience served as the only necessary security system. The first year in her new role passed quickly, dominated by legislative meetings and complex forensic audits of other similar high-risk systems. Evelyn discovered that her experience with Chimera had provided her with a unique, almost terrifying fluency in the language of betrayal, allowing her to spot hidden agendas and backdoors in corporate proposals that no external analyst would ever catch.
She adopted a disciplined personal routine, early mornings spent running, not to clear her head, but to practice the methodical, linear focus required for complex debugging. Her physical discipline mirrored her professional life. She was building resilience against future shocks, ensuring her emotional core remained as robust and unbreachable as her secure network protocols. The lingering whispers of her past occasionally surfaced, a profile written in a tech magazine that sensationalized her story, or a panicked phone call from a former Nexus colleague concerned about a competitive espionage attempt. Evelyn handled these intrusions with detached professionalism, seeing them merely as data points in the ongoing narrative of institutional vigilance. She learned to read people, particularly powerful men in the defense sector, as complex systems riddled with vulnerabilities. Their pride, their ambition, and their over-reliance on subordinates were all exploitable weaknesses that Chimera had been designed to track. Knowing these human flaws, she could better safeguard the digital frameworks meant to govern them. Daniel's trial became a protracted, dry legal affair, focusing purely on financial fraud and misuse of government funds, largely step-citing the sensational ethical violations. Evelyn's testimony was critical, surgical, and absolutely without personal flair, ensuring the prosecution built its case on fact, not on the emotional residue of a broken marriage. She realized the irony that Daniel, in his attempt to model her behavior for Chimera, had inadvertently cataloged all her professional moves. He had tracked her meticulous planning, her late-night focus, and her refusal to compromise, all traits that she had ultimately turned against him. The monster had documented the making of its own slayer. Evelyn sold all of Daniel's remaining personal effects: his awards, his extensive technical library, his specialized equipment, with the proceeds going to a foundation dedicated to ethical AI development.
She wanted nothing to remain that bore the stain of his compromised career or his deceptive intellect. She began teaching a graduate seminar on digital ethics in AI deployment. The course was hugely popular, drawing students fascinated by the intersection of high-stakes technology and moral failure. She used the Chimera case, anonymized and generalized, as its central cautionary tale. Her relationships remained cautious, based on transparency and mutual professional respect. She valued honest communication as highly as encryption, recognizing that the human protocols were often the most fragile and the most crucial to maintain. There was no room for ambiguity or hidden code in her new friendships. A year and a half after the detonation, she received a commendation from the Senate Oversight Committee for her work in cybersecurity ethics. It was a purely professional honor, validating her actions and officially cementing her status as a critical voice in the global debate on technological accountability. She understood that the digital world was in a constant state of flux, always producing new threats and new betrayals. Her work was endless, but it was work that mattered, work that prevented the cold, calculated erosion of privacy on a massive structural scale. The memory of the surveillance, the chilling realization that her life had been a continuous data stream for Daniel's benefit, remained a permanent, visceral reminder. It was the weight that gave her new career its gravity and its unwavering moral center.
She sometimes wondered what Daniel thought now, stripped of his power and his systems. She hoped he understood that his failure was not a coding error, but a moral error, a failure of character that no amount of predictive modeling could have overcome. Evelyn was no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had protected. She was the chief consultant, the code breaker, the expert who proved that an intelligent, ethical woman could defeat the most advanced system of control when fighting for her own sovereignty. Standing by her office window, watching the sunset cast long shadows over the unmonitored city, she took a deep breath. She was fully present, fully sovereign, and completely secure. The ghost was gone, and Evelyn was finally, perfectly free. Understood. I will end the story in 11 paragraphs, ensuring the final paragraph is a large concluding block that summarizes Evelyn's final state and the lasting impact of her actions. The new office, stark and clean against the sprawling cityscape, was Evelyn's personal monument to independence. It was a space defined by integrity, where every meeting, every document, and every network connection was rooted in verifiable, transparent protocols. Her role as chief ethics consultant demanded a cold, unwavering objectivity, a stance she maintained effortlessly, having long ago processed the emotional toll of Daniel's betrayal. The past was now strictly professional history, a case study in how quickly technical brilliance can descend into moral failure. She spent her days meticulously drafting global guidelines that would serve as the ethical armor for future AI deployments. Her work focused on ensuring that systems were auditable, consent was explicit, and that no single entity could ever again utilize personal networks as covert, non-consensual testing grounds. She drew directly upon the structural vulnerabilities of Project Chimera to build resilient, human-centric safeguards.
The legal fallout reached its formal conclusion. Daniel received a significant prison sentence for fraud and misuse of government resources. His professional name was permanently stripped from all major engineering registries. He had achieved the total destruction of his own legacy, a ruin more complete than any external attack could have inflicted, all thanks to the forensic diligence of the woman he had failed to respect. Evelyn sold the house, not through a real estate agent, but through a secure private trust, ensuring the property's history as a surveillance platform was permanently obscured from the public record. The financial proceeds were clean, untainted by Daniel's fraud, and served as the final, absolute separation between her past and her reclaimed future. She maintained a fierce, almost monastic control over her personal life. New relationships, professional or otherwise, were approached with a practiced caution. She understood that while the digital threat was gone, the human capacity for deception remained. Trust, for Evelyn, was no longer a feeling. It was a security protocol that had to be earned and continuously verified. The media coverage eventually subsided, relegating the Chimera scandal to history books and corporate law case studies. Evelyn found solace in this fading spotlight. Her goal was never recognition, but remediation. She preferred the quiet authority of her new position, where her influence was measured not in headlines, but in the structural integrity of international policy. She mentored young women in cybersecurity, teaching them not only the complex math and coding languages, but also the moral fortitude required to resist pressure and corruption. Her most crucial lesson: never allowed the pursuit of data to compromise the dignity of the subject. She instilled in them a ruthless commitment to ethical practice.